Welcome, friends and colleagues. This webinar is an asynchronous session for the National Writing Project Midwest Conference. My name is Vicki Collett, and I'm Associate Director of the Northwest Arkansas Writing Project.
My name is Jennifer Pena Florida, and I'm a teacher consultant for the Northwest Arkansas Writing Project, as well as I'm currently teaching 11th grade English and AP Language and Composition at a small school in Berryville, Arkansas.
My name is Heather Zolodek, and I'm an instructional facilitator at the same school that Jennifer instructs at, as well as a teacher consultant for the Northwest Arkansas Writing Project. Together, we've been working on an initiative to bring a journalism writing experience to high school age students in a summer camp experience. And we're excited to tell you a little bit about that work.
This initiative was funded by the MacArthur Foundation, and it has allowed writing project directors and teacher consultants to plan, implement, and then iterate a summer camp experience focused on journalism writing in 5 rural communities, which could be considered news deserts. And the goals of the program include creating a powerful and spreadable model for engaging rural youth in investigating, publishing, and circulating content and media on issues that are of public concern to rural communities, and developing partnerships between these programs and local newspapers and media outlets, and also with national outlets focusing on rural news in communities to promote publishing of writing and media by rural youth. And then finally, increasing the number of teacher leaders in rural communities prepared to facilitate professional learning focused on argument. So here are the 5 states with rural districts that are working on these journalism camps with National Writing Project. And we, of course, are lucky enough to be one of them. We're the Northwest Arkansas Writing Project. So what do we mean when we say civic journalism? There's a distinction that we make between civic journalism and maybe the typical secondary argumentative or explanatory writing assignments. And this is the importance of interviews and writing to publish and to be read, and connections with larger issues and efforts in the community, and really a wide range of things that can be journalism, from personal features to issue analysis.
Why does Civic Journalism Initiative matter? It matters because this offers our students a voice in their community and also a way to make changes to the genre of journalism. So this initiative, through this initiative, students learn different things. For example, fostering agency, building community. We focused on valuing voices, and they also were able to work with partners in the journalism field.
So this next slide is what we looked at in our first iteration of journalism camp. And these come from our exit interviews with our 2019 journalism students. So you see this first one here, this writing feels much different than any other writing I've done. Mostly in a school setting, I care very little about what I'm writing, and this camp is much different. I feel that I'm improving and growing and just learning about something I now really love. So this particular student, she is a good writer and she enjoyed writing, but what she told me was that in her English classes in school, she didn't have choice, she didn't have agency. She had to write an analysis for To Kill a Mockingbird, or she had to write short answer responses for history classes, but it wasn't anything that she was vested or interested in. And so what our journalism camp offered her was a space to really dive deeply into an issue that mattered to her. And this response is her feeling of being empowered, that her voice matters. Our second excerpt states, this journalism camp helped me learn about writing, not just journalism writing, but writing in general, that I need to have purpose, keep the audience in mind. I used to be so scared to share my writing with others, but now I'm not. I think I'll have the courage to do something. And I remember this student. She was very, very shy. And when she first found out that we were going to do peer response, Heather, do you remember? Her eyes got really big and she was very, very hesitant. But she participated and she realized the value of having others read her work, that it validated what she was writing and it gave her feedback that she needed to continue honing in on the writerly moves that she was trying to make. And that last idea, I think I have the courage to do something. For her to say that at the end of 3 weeks was pretty astounding for me, knowing where she was in the beginning as a very shy student, coming out, realizing that she is a courageous, a strong young person. And our final excerpt from our exit interview is this statement. Before the camp, I thought journalism is just writing, but now I have learned what journalism actually is. Journalism is so much more than just writing. Journalism tells a story and informs people of what's going on in the world. My writing can inform people too. She's actually one of our repeat students. When she came in, she was in 8th, going into her freshman year. So she was one of the youngest ones, very shy like her friend, but very inquisitive and hungry. She considered herself a writer to begin with, but she just thought journalism, like she said, was writing. And she realized that she has an affinity towards writing for change. And in this, and we'll see some of the things that she says later in this new iteration of our journalism camp. But what she ended up with, walking away with, was the power of her voice and her unique voice, specifically as an adopted child of the foster system. And so it's really exciting to see her realizing that the avenue of writing can be a way for her to reach others, to be purposeful and intentional. And at such a young age, that was especially touching for me as a writing teacher.
Yeah, before you go on, if you can, let's think about this piece a little bit more. First, for our listeners, I wanted to clarify, Jen mentioned that the first iteration was 2019. And then of course, last year, the camp didn't happen because of the pandemic. And so now we are into our second iteration of the camp. And so you're going to hear more about that, but there's that gap here in between. So we've got these some returning students that Jen was referring to, even after that year off. But I wanted to think about this authentic purpose for writing, because I know as a writing teacher myself, I always want to provide authentic purpose for writing. And, I feel like the internet has just made it easier to, in online spaces, have authentic audiences. But what do you think, and either one of you could speak to this, but what do you think about the journalism camp made it feel really authentic for the participants?
I think it was really, it boils down to one word: choice. They could choose whatever topic mattered to them. And so for some, it was too much. They had to start narrowing it down. So of course we provided we provided learning protocols for them to hone in on specific topics. But when they finally got to the topic that they wanted to write about, even though the writing was challenging and difficult for many of them, they were invested in the writing because they were invested in those ideas and in what they wanted to learn and what they wanted to share. And so often, now that I'm back in the high school classroom and I'm back at the school where we do our summer journalism camp, too often, and I'm guilty of this too. Too often, my students are writing for a certain task, for a certain purpose, because it's a summative assessment or it's a formative assessment, and I'm trying to see if they're building those skills that I've been teaching. Whereas here in our journalism camp, there really isn't that kind of high stakes pressure for me as a writing teacher. In that capacity, I'm just a guide. I'm just a more experienced other. And it was frustrating knowing that I am not held to the same standard in the sense of I have to teach to the standards. Instead, I approached it with, what do you want to learn? What do you want to learn about yourself as a writer? And how can I help you get there? And that was through the authentic writing purposes.
Yeah,
What about you?
I think the students recognized that also, and that sort of liberated them too. They didn't feel that pressure to be graded or to have the perfect paper. It was more about what they wanted to communicate. And so they asked questions about their writing, and they sought mentor text to help support that. When in class, they don't always do that. They try to get the assignment done to fit what the teacher's expectations are, not necessarily theirs.
Yeah.
One thing I want to circle back to before we end, and so you can just let this float in the back of your mind, is we're talking right now about a summer journalism camp experience, or in the case of this iteration, it was kind of happening in off days, curricular off days during the school year. But I want to circle back before we close to the idea that many of these principles and practices that you found had value for yourselves and your students could perhaps be integrated into the writing curriculum during school, during their assigned coursework. And so I do want to come back to that idea, but I just was thinking that our viewers right now might be thinking, well, I am not going to do a summer journalism camp, but what am I going to do with these ideas? So for those of you who are watching this video, just start thinking about that yourself in the back of your mind. And maybe when you get an idea, pause the video and jot yourself a quick note about, ooh, this is an idea that even if I don't do a journalism camp, I can take this idea and run with it. So just encouragement to our viewers to do that. Okay.
I can already answer that question. I didn't realize that I did this with my last unit of the year with my juniors. So yeah, it's interesting. So we were doing a unit, finishing a unit I titled Fear and Cultural Anxiety in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. And so instead of focusing on a rhetorical analysis or an argumentative paper regarding, the themes that we were studying in the Crucible, instead we were looking at, I extended it further and I said, what are some we talked about the social issues that were pervading Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, and then how it was it was an allusion to McCarthyism in the 1950s. And so I asked them for their summative assessment was to think about a social issue that is currently permeating our society. And let's do some exploratory writing regarding that. And then I built in some learning protocols for them to narrow down those topics to social issues that matter to them. And I'm pretty sure I got it from this idea of the authentic purpose, really giving them student voice and student agency, giving them control over what they wanted to write. And then me as their writing teacher, just facilitate that writing, getting those thoughts down onto paper.
Yeah, I can see how that mirrors a lot of what you did during the journalism camp. And we'll come back at the end too, just to have you maybe think a little bit more and have Heather think more about how she has seen these principles and practices reflected during the school year in regular coursework. That's a great example, Jen. Thanks for sharing.
So one of the things that we really wanted the students to experience was real world journalism. And so to do that, we had to bring partners in, and our small community is lucky in that we still do have a local newspaper. There's only about 3 employees, so it's very small, but they were very generous. And for our first camp, they came every day and discussed with our kids some aspect of journalism. The students were really inspired, especially with one of the younger employees, and she came from a small town and discussed her journey into journalism. And that's what the first quote talks about. The editor coming in helped me because I will hopefully take what he says and apply it. And then she added about that younger journalist. Miss Jones from the newspaper provided me with lots of information about what it means to have a passion. Another journalist we reached out to was Andrea Bruce, who is an award-winning National Geographic photojournalist. And we were able to do that through the writing project, and which we're going to talk about something she does later on that we've partnered with this year to do. So this second quote, Google chatting with the photojournalist really opened my eyes to what I wanted to do. I'd probably do something like journalism in my future. Talking to Miss Jones and Andrea, it kind of opened my eyes like, whoa, this is what I'll be doing. And the students were amazed by Andrea Bruce, and that was so inspiring to them. So we've actually reached out to her, and she'll be speaking at our second camp, one of the first days, to sort of get the on-site camp, overnight camp part going.
Cool. I just really love that this student now had a new vision for her future that includes writing, and that makes her classwork even more, like, it gives value to the writing coursework, even if it's not specifically journalistic related. She can see that connection to her future hopes and dreams. So that's really cool.
No, let me see. Okay, there we go. So the power of journalistic writing. This first quote, or this first idea, both teachers and students came to understand that students do have power in their words. And I remember our colleague, Crystal, she was part of our first iteration, and she noticed a lot of collaborative writing that we did with our students. We didn't necessarily call it the writing room, but it really was the writing room. And I've been listening to a lot of podcasts of Tina Fey specifically, and she talks about the writing room and how these writers and these comedic writers get together, and they don't create in isolation, they create as a community. They share their ideas, they edit, they revise together, and that's exactly what we did. And I remember Crystal telling me, I need to do this more in my classroom. Writing is such an isolated experience that they need to have more opportunities to write collaboratively. Because there is this idea that when working collaboratively and hearing other people's voices and other people's ideas, and then fine tuning and taking those ideas and applying it into the rewrites, students do find that their words are powerful, and that collaborative nature allows that to happen organically in ways that even me as a writing teacher, it's something that happens organically. I can create and foster this community of practice, but it's the students actually doing the work, and with them doing the work, collaborating with each other, they come out on the other side realizing, wow, this was powerful, and I am a powerful writer. There's one of the things that we did in our first iteration was a longer investigative piece. And this is what we were talking about earlier, where students were given agency and they wrote about what they cared about. And here are just some topics that our students wrote. This one in particular was really looking at her identity as half white, half Hispanic. And this was especially during a time where our former president's administration was really promoting this idea of xenophobia and sending Mexicans back to their country. And so she explored this idea, the media's portrayal and the news and media portrayal of her people, and her specifically as being a young person, both Hispanic and white, but looks white, but still identifies as Hispanic. What does that mean? Who is she in this world that our democracy has created? This particular student focused on body image and specifically body dysphoria, and how Instagram can be a cause of young people falling into the trap of body dysphoria, which can lead to mental illness, specifically anorexia or bulimia. And she was really interested in this because it was something that she and her friends were experiencing, and she wanted to write more about that. So for this particular student, she was really looking at the drug scene at her school, specifically her friends, and the big drug that was being used with her cohort was vaping. And so she really wanted to look, what were the effects of vaping? Studies were starting to come out regarding that, and she wanted to know more about it. And so it was interesting because she interviewed friends who were vaping and juxtaposed their voices with what the science was saying. So that was interesting. This particular student, this writer, he really wanted to focus on, he was a funny writer, he was a humorous writer, and so he wanted to inject humor in it. And so he was looking at the value of the habits of spending and saving money. He was a senior, and he said, I remember having a conversation with him regarding, as he was narrowing down this topic, and he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, I'm about to graduate in a year, and I don't know anything about money, and I'm not going to college, and I don't know how to save. And so he took this opportunity to do more research on something that mattered to him, because he turned 18, he was going to be out of the house, and he needed to know, how do I survive in the real world?
I love Jen, on those topics that they chose. Like, those are things that they really cared about, as you say in the slide here. But I remember coming out to Bearville and sitting down, and these students didn't know me, but the second I sat down with them, they were so passionate about the topics that they had chosen that they just basically started spilling everything they were thinking about to me. And it was so apparent how relevant and important these pieces had already become for them. So really, that power of journalistic writing was so evident in the care that they had for the topics that they had selected.
Yes. And I think it speaks to, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it speaks to the fact that they felt that they could write about anything, that they wouldn't be judged by their peers or by us, their teachers, that they felt and they knew that we were supporting their writing development. And because of that, they really dug deep into those articles, into those topics.
I agree, yes.
Is this one mine? I have to look really fast. Intentional writing. Sorry, Heather, is this one mine?
Yes, yeah, you'll talk about this one.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so this is student agency. Sorry, I can't see it because I have this line at the very top and I can't read the screen at the very top. So this is me. So I'm focusing on our current spring journalism camp. So we have 7 students, 7 writers. We started with 12, but as you know, things dwindle down, and so now we have 7 who have been coming every time we have a session. And so one of the things that we've noticed that matters most in curating an inquisitive space where for journalism writing is through student agency. And I know we've talked about this in our first iteration, but we're seeing it again in our second iteration, this idea of student agency. So what does this look like? Firstly, it's intentional writing assignments that give them choice. So for this particular one, we focused on just 2 writing assignments. Our previous one, we had multiple writing assignments. And Heather and I decided, you know what? More is not more. Sometimes less is more. So let's be intentional with the writing assignments that we give them and give them more time to write. And so that's what we did. So we had 2 writing assignments. The first one was the New York Times op-ed contest, which Dr. Collett shared with us. And so I have a link there. If you want to click on it, it'll take you to the op-ed contest. What New York Times does is they support journalism. They support journalism in young people. They offer contests throughout the year. This particular one passed in April, passed last month, but they are perpetually offering contests for students to write and to get published. Our kids were so excited when they found out that their writing could be chosen to be printed in a national newspaper. I think just letting them know that, and then seeing the mentor text that we picked, helped them see that, oh my goodness, I can contribute to the national arena. My ideas can matter to a wider audience than Berryville, Arkansas. I mean, it was exciting to see that and to feel the palpable energy when we introduced this writing assignment.
And can I just jump in really quickly also with that, because they have multiple contests over the years, the meeting we had after they submitted, they were talking about the next contest, which wasn't even part of our camp, but they were sharing the different deadlines and stuff with each other, because some of them planned to go ahead and write and submit for them too. So that was very exciting to see.
Wow. I
and
love
it's
that.
Not even for a grade.
Yeah, I love that it's having an impact going forward. It's not just about this particular camp, it's really impacting their future.
For sure. And then our second one is Andrea Bruce, our democracy project, and we've linked the toolkit for you to use, which we are walking through it with our students currently. We're about ready to start our on campus at the University of Arkansas camp. And so we haven't completely finished our democracy project with Andrea Bruce, but it is good. There are so many resources. As an 11th grade English teacher focusing on American literature, but it's really writing through the lens of American literature and the story of America, I can see how I can use Andrea Bruce's Our Democracy, different parts of it, into my curriculum for next year. And so I'm excited to see what that's going to look like in that iteration. But we're using Andrea Bruce's really because our students loved her. When they met her in 2018, the exit ticket for that day was all about Andrea Bruce because she comes from a small town. She was just like them. And so we wanted to make sure that for this time, we're going to be using her because they connected with her ethos, especially because many of them want to get out of small town Arkansas. They want to experience something bigger, and they saw that if she can do it, we can do it as well.
And something about that toolkit really quickly, when we finished using the lessons, the day that we introduced our democracy and used that toolkit for our instructional pieces, we actually had a student compliment us on our instruction on the way out of the room that day. He said, really good lesson today, thank you, as he left, and it was amusing. It's a really great toolkit and offers some really great resources.
Cool.
We'll speak more about it. Heather's going to speak more about it because we did lift and use many of those protocols from the toolkit. So that New York Times op-ed piece, I want to share with you some of the topics that our students, our journalism writers wrote about. So one student, this is our student, our writer who is our repeat, and she's our only repeat. So she really wanted to focus on foster care, and I was just blown away by how open she was. That she was so willing to share her adoption process, not just with us, but with people she has never met. I mean, she submitted this in New York Times, and it was just amazing watching her go through the writing process. This particular writer really wanted to focus on gender norms. I know her pretty well, and she lives in an environment right now where it's really focused on the patriarchy. And so as a bright, intelligent young woman, she is really looking critically and at the gender norms, especially in a southern state like Arkansas. This other student, these two are best friends, and so she also wanted to focus on the patriarchy, and because of some experiences that she went through. This student, it's interesting, she's our only writer who is virtual this year, but she heard about our journalism camp, and she told me, I haven't written all year, and I'm coming back to the classroom next year. I need to write. And so that's her reason why. Well, this was one of her reasons. And her second reason is, I want to get out of Berryville and go to the University of Arkansas and just something outside of Berryville. So those are her two reasons. But she really wrote about sexual violence, her own experience as she was a witness to. She writes this in her piece, but what she as a witness to someone very close to her. So this student was writing about genocide. Her family escaped from Guatemala, and she wanted to write about that, and how genocide is swept under the rug in politics, and how it is happening today and needs to be addressed. That it's something that is timeless and timely. This young man, he wants to be either a lawyer or a politician, and he focused heavily on hypocrisy in American politics. And I know him very well, and he comes from a very conservative family. And as an outsider in his own family, seeing the hypocrisy in his home, he wanted to write more deeply about that. And then this writer, he's a wonderful young man, and he wrote about this topic because heavy metal helped him get through his depression, ironically. And he wanted to write about this topic as a call to action for people who don't understand or don't get heavy metal music, to see there is the beauty in it. And then also for those who love heavy metal, to see how listening to it, for one man's journey into heavy metal and how it brought him out of his depression and into empathy and compassion for those who suffer from depression like he does.
Wow. So when you were going through that list, I was just thinking these are heavy topics for the students to be addressing and opening up about, very personal and important topics, personal for them, but also not isolated to their own personal experience, right? That's something that's meaningful for readers across the country. So they're talking about issues that are personal to them, but important to society. And I'm sorry that I chuckled a little bit when you got to that last bullet, because when it popped up, I was thinking, oh, there goes my comment about, heavy topics. But when you started to explain it, I see actually this also is a really heavy topic about heavy metal, but it's something that is deeply important, and the connection to mental health is something that again is not only individual, but societal, and important for all of us to understand more about. So I just really applaud these students in the choices that they've made and their willingness to dig in and really investigate something that is like such a part of themselves, and also creating a dialogue about it, not only within your camp, but since they've submitted these to New York Times, you know, potentially a national audience. So how exciting to see the really important topics that they've selected.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So our next slide, I want to share with you some of the examples of these, their final pieces from their writing. I'm not going to read them all. So this particular one was focusing on the patriarchy, specifically her idea of being a woman. And I chose this one because her first draft really focused on her opinion. She wrote down her thoughts. And then in this final draft, the one that she turned in, she embedded as you can see, she embedded the evidence that was required from the contest guidelines. And it was just really beautiful how she was able to take what they say and then add what she says. So, you know, that idea of they say, I say, and especially that last line in the first paragraph, a predominant belief in the South is that women are meant to be codependent. This becomes problematic when women try to start establishing their identity as a person. That sentence just speaks so much for where she is right now as a young person, a young woman trying to navigate in a man's world. So this particular one she also focused on the patriarchy, but really looking at it through the lens of women being sisters to each other. And I'm going to read this because I think this is her closing, her call to action. She writes, "We are not each other's enemies seeking a superficial prize of attention. We are sisters, not contesters. We are strong, independent, and do not need to rely on validation to realize our value as such. Rather, we'll find our value in embracing who we are and looking at each other with love and pride rather than envy and jealousy." She took some time changing her diction to make it succinct, but also emotive. And so it was neat to see how she moved it from her start to her finish. So this student, this writer, again, is about her writing process. And she's not the strongest of all of our writers, but oh my goodness, does she work so hard. And I see Heather nodding her head, and she is so open for feedback. So what I have for you is her opening, and then where you see the ... I edited her closing. So her first draft was a hodgepodge of just ideas. It really was like, and I mean this in, it sounds bad, but I mean it in the best way. It's word vomit. And we know is it Anne Lamott, crappy first drafts? And so we told our writers that it's going to be a crappy first draft, and she embraced that. But this is through the multiple rewrites. She took that image, this thing that she got, this teddy bear, and she wove that into her story. And it was just so beautiful. And I want to read this because her first draft to her final draft, it was like night and day. So here's her opening paragraphs. "During my adoption process, I was given a teddy bear that I named Tiger. Even though a piece of fluff posing as a cheetah was not my forever home, it was still the one thing that experienced it all with me. When I entered foster care at the age of 5, my little sister also joined me on this journey. We had nothing of our own and no place to call home, like many of the children experiencing the same process as we did." And then in the meet, she was talking about the foster system and giving some statistics about it in Carroll County, working through this idea of it's important to support the foster system. And then she ends with the personal. "Even though life may be hard, loving others, looking for the good in life and in others are the factors that one truly can call home. Being given a teddy bear showed me the kindness this world offers. I just had to look for it. Giving a teddy bear or donating to your local DHS can help foster kids feel the same, even if their current place isn't their forever home. So powerful. And then finally, this one, he was focusing again, hypocrisy in American politics. And he really was focusing on making his ideas more clear. I'm not going to read this, but he usually doesn't start with a narrative, with a story. He usually just goes straight into his writing. But as you notice in this first paragraph, he uses a personal anecdote, to bring himself into the story before moving into his topic, which I thought was particularly strong. And so these are just some examples of what our students created in their first writing assignment. And so the question is this, and I'm guessing some of you might be asking this: how did we get to this point? What did we do? And this is what we did. We intentionally fostered a community of practice where a polyphony of voices were heard and valued. And as we move on to the next two slides that Heather will be sharing, I hope that we make it a little bit more clear what polyphony of voices is and how we fostered this and how you can lift and use this into your own classroom.
As we've mentioned, and as you as teachers know, writing can be very personal and very scary, especially sharing your ideas and thoughts on paper, not to mention your skill as a writer. So we intentionally tried to foster a community where students could do this and not be afraid. We began by just letting them get to know each other, because a lot of these kids didn't share classes and they weren't familiar with each other. And like Jennifer mentioned, we even have one student that was virtual and hadn't been to school the whole year. So we began with a photo scavenger hunt, which the students loved. And that was basically, we gave them emotions like nostalgia, happiness, fear. And we sent them out in a time setting where they had to take a photo of something that represented that emotion and bring it back and share it with the class. And it was just a team building activity. And the kids had a lot of fun doing that. Then we started guiding them towards narrowing down their ideas. How are they going to pick something that mattered to them? And to do that, we did multiple things. And one of the things we did was what we called a metro map. And it was a protocol where they draw out their journey to the writing camp. What led them there? What turns did they take? And we told them their line diverged into another line. And so they sort of explored their journey to get to the point that they were at. And in doing so, decisions, big changes in their life, things that happened. Another thing that we really focused on that the students mentioned as, and we did this the last camp also, as one of the most powerful and impactful things that happened at the camp were the peer response feedback groups. And this initially was the most terrifying aspect of the camp to them. And it became something that they relied on and wanted to do more of. And that's where the students would share their writing to the other students and get feedback on the writing. And how we would do that is we would group them in a writing team, and that became their team that they would go back to for more feedback and input. They would present their paper, and the students would give them what they liked about it. And you can help me, Jennifer, if I misstate these, but what they liked about it, questions they had about it, and also some suggestions. They had those three topics. The person presenting their paper couldn't reply to any of the comments. They just had to listen, because what we said is sometimes you spend so much time trying to defend your decisions that you're not really listening to what is being said. So they would do these peer response. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say with that, oops, we're getting an echo. So I had to smile when you started talking about the peer response feedback forms, because that's when we were in the Invitational Summer Institute, that's the same form that we used to write. So it's kind of like full circle here, and we're seeing you using that,
yes,
that form with your students. And I'm guessing that since this is a writing project, conference, many of the people who are listening to this video have had that same experience during their Invitational Summer Institute experience and have probably taken that protocol back to their classroom as well, and hopefully found it as powerful as you're describing here. So thanks for bringing that up, Heather.
Yeah, and actually we asked the kids what activity has helped you the most, and they always put that one down. So even as terrifying as it is, because I remember shaking, like physically shaking when I was reading my paper at the Summer Invitational, they love it, and it becomes a very helpful tool for them. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying yes.
Another thing that they found really powerful and helpful was an activity where we looked at mentor text. And we actually did this, the most recent time we've done it is with the opinion editorials, the past winners for the New York Times. So we gave them the option of looking through the different editorials and picking up the ones that really impacted them, the ones that they felt some kind of connection to. And then we had them look at what moves did that writer make that made this piece speak to you. And they made lists of these different writerly moves, and then we had them map it out. So we had them create a map of what could be added to their paper. And it could be something like using a personal narrative at the beginning of it to pull it in. It could be a questioning. Whatever stood out to them, they wrote it on sticky notes. And then we had them divide these up into the different sections. We had them create sections and titles for them, categories. Once they had done that, we had them reflect on these different categories and the different components that they noticed, and which ones do you feel confident about, which ones do you want to learn more about, and which ones are you going to apply to your paper. And from that activity, we were able to have sort of like a map for the students on what they need to be focusing on when writing, but also what we need to be focusing on instructing the students. So you can see a little picture on the right-hand side. This is what they came up with. And we had them mark the different skills that they felt they were weak in and wanted more instruction. And that's where we based our writing instruction on.
I really love how powerful it is that you are demonstrating that the instruction during camp was responsive to students' needs. And so it wasn't just, well, check, here are the things we need to cover during the camp. Instead, it was really based on students' needs.
Yeah, it was important. We felt like that was more of the buy-in and that community feeling is this is as a community what they felt they were weak in or wanted more guidance on. And they really responded well.
Yeah, they identified their own needs.
Yeah. Discussion questions. This is another thing that we did that really built community, and we stole these from Andrea Bruce's toolkit, and the discussion was amazing, and I'll kind of get into that in the next slide. But so she poses 3 questions. What do I like about my community? What do I want to change about my community? And how would I change these things? And the students really dug deep into issues that were relevant to not just themselves, but to the community that they lived in. And from those issues, they were able to, you can see from the slide, the different things that they picked: kindness, diversity, class, the rich history of the community, and then things they would like to change, how they wanted to have more acceptance in the community. And what we found very interesting, and it's something that Andrea had pointed out, is that how to change it, nobody mentioned journalism. So we were able to point out that, you want to make all these changes. So how do we do it? One way is through this writing that we're doing right now, is having a wider audience read what changes you would like to make and why they are impactful. We wanted to make sure that there was a polyphony of voices being heard. And something that we found really interesting, and actually the students noticed, and this was such an interesting discussion, is that our students said when we were talking about democracy and what it means to be disenfranchised and what does democracy mean to the disenfranchised, one of our students chimed in, I think every Democrat in the county is in this room. Why is that? And they got into this really interesting discussion because our community is very conservative, and they decided that they felt very marginalized in their community, that their voices weren't heard, or even if they were heard, they were pushed aside and not recognized or not valued. And so that was sort of a discussion that they led themselves into and solved for themselves a question that they wanted to be heard, and that this camp was offering them an opportunity to be heard. And we furthered that by intentionally picking mentor texts that showed marginalized voices and how they were trying to be heard, and their struggles were being voiced in their writing.
I think we had a conversation, Heather, afterwards, where we realized, and I don't know if I've mentioned this already, where we realized that every single one of our campers, our writers, are marginalized in some way, shape, or form. We have some examples on our slide, but it was interesting, and we talked about why, out of all of our students that we have at Berryville, why these students? Why did they choose to come to our journalism camp? They're not getting paid. They're taking time out of their days to come on days that we don't meet on campus, to come to campus and work. And it really we talked about that, and we really wanted to make sure that their time was valued, that they were coming in and spending the day with us and doing purposeful, meaningful work. And that's why we were really intentional with the mentor text, like you mentioned, Heather, choosing voices that were different from the voices that they typically read or listen or watch in their regular classrooms. Intentional questioning. I liked how we didn't, our questions, and you, those of you watching, we know this. We don't ask closed-ended questions. We want to ask open-ended questions, but sometimes we forget about that in the midst of planning and teaching. But these how or what questions that we used in these in the days that we let out our journalism camp, it really helped dive deeper into these issues. The issues that they want to focus on for their second writing assignment. And so it was really interesting to see that. And then of course, allowing those polyphony voices to be heard in our small group discussions, our whole group discussions, writing on paper, writing collaboratively, in the different protocols that we used. It was really neat to see that, especially this last session that we had, where all of this that you see on the screen, where all of this happened. So Dr. Khaled, do you want us to go back to that question that you were asking us to keep in the back of our mind as we wrapping up?
Are we almost to the last slide? Is the next slide the last one?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think we can talk about it here. So I did want to point out that the PowerPoint that we have used for this session is available at tinyurl.com/summer journalism camp. And Heather and Jen put some links in there to some of the resources that they've talked about. And so we want to encourage you to check those out and think about, how those might work in your coursework. If you're planning some kind of a summer camp, obviously you can take the structures that you've heard about today and, build them into your camp. But I hope as we talked, you were jotting down some ideas about things that seemed really important for you to incorporate into your day-to-day ELA classes. And one thing, I'll start by just saying one thing that stood out to me as I was listening to your description of what you've really tried to do is you talked about choice. And so you might both remember me talking about the C's of motivation. So when we think about what really motivates learners, I've kind of identified a whole list of C's. They all start with the letter C. That helps me remember them. But I realized that all of those were evident in your description of the camp. So giving students control and choice, but also challenge, right? These were not easy things. They all picked things that had challenge for them. And that level of challenge, I think was motivating. And then connection, collaboration, community, how important that is for motivation. And I'm thinking about the collaborative writing too. And just, I think maybe both of you know Angie Greiner, an article on collaborative writing that she and I did will be in the July English Journal, which is coming out right after this conference, right after our viewers are going to have access to this video. So you might check out that article on collaborative writing in the English Journal. So the connection, collaboration, and community. And then the final C that I often talk about with engagement is construction of meaning. They're really not just having some meaning given to them, they're going out there and building it themselves. So that construction of meaning seemed to be really evident as well. So no wonder they're finding this camp so engaging and meaningful. You've really built in all of these elements that research suggests and that we know from our own experience are going to engage students in the learning. So as I've kind of asked you to reflect on how these elements, not just those C's, but all of the things you mentioned, the peer revision, and I won't list them because I want you to, but some of the things that happened during the camp and that maybe you've talked about here that any ELA teacher can say, yes, I can, whether or not I'm having a camp, I can take this back to my classroom. What are a few of the practices that you want to elevate before we close?
I definitely think choice. I think oftentimes teachers get stuck in a topic and that limits students. When you saw from the choices that they picked to write about themselves, a lot of times they can come up with something so much bigger than we can. And something so much more important to them that they value and have passion about. So choice is definitely one of them. Mentor tests. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think alongside with the idea of choice, this connects to it is, I think about that protocol, the affinity mapping that we did with the mentor text, right? Mm-hmm. So having them look at mentor texts, analyze rhetorically the moves that these writers are making, and then create some sort of affinity map where they categorize the different my battery's about to run down, the different ideas, and then as a writing teacher, having them focus just on one or two writing skills, and that's it. Because I can think of these ideas are great, but if I have a class of 30 students, how am I going to do this effectively and efficiently? And I think doing that affinity map and having students really just focus on one or two writerly moves can make it manageable as a teacher of writing.
And I love how the students identified those moves themselves. So
yes.
Cool. And Heather, you were starting to say something about mentor texts, which Jen mentioned one way that you use them, but what else did you want to say about mentor texts?
That was it. I think I myself as a writer always go to a mentor text and break it down to see, this is a writer I want to emulate, or this is a writer who did something well. How can I take those moves and make them my own? And I think as teachers, sometimes we forget that we rely on it, and we forget to offer that crutch to students. And so I think that's so important to do.
Yeah, any other practices you want to elevate?
I think the response groups, sorry, that just made me think of something else that we have taken from the writing project that I think is also important, but it's celebrating that product that they come up with. We did the writer's chair, or where they got to read their piece afterwards, and every student was willing to participate and excited to share their piece because we had built that community of support. And so they might not read their whole piece, but they would read a section of it. And so I think we sometimes, it's just a deadline, we get it done and move on. And instead of celebrating the hard work that students have put into their writing, I think that's really important. So definitely celebrating. Yeah.
And then finally, for me, just giving them time to write in class. I come most with the students that who I currently have, many of them work outside of school. And so they don't have the time, or they don't put in the time. And so if I value writing and I want them to value writing, I need to add time to write in my class. And we did that. We had blocks of writing time for them to get it down, because these are our writers, they're students. And so we were under no we knew that when we finished, they wouldn't necessarily go home and write. They would be doing other things. And so we wanted to embed writing time so that they can accomplish, X, Y, and Z for that session. And that's something that I do in my own classroom. And sometimes I forget, but intentionally building time to write. It seems kind of scary sometimes because we have a finite amount of time as teachers, but it's so important. From my own experience, so important to build that time in.
Wow, I think you have brought up some really important strategies that any ELA teacher could take into their classroom. So thank you so much for sharing not only those strategies, but your experiences and the experiences of the students that you've been working with. So if you want to go to that last slide, that has our email addresses on. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We would also love to hear if you take some of these ideas and run with them, how that works for you and your students. So thanks for joining us. And especially thank you to Jen and Heather for sharing their awesome experiences with writers.
Thank you.